Israel marking Memorial Day and Independence Day for the second time since October 7th and the war began. We will talk about the only elections that involve Israelis and diaspora Jews. Our guest today, a leading tech figure in Israel who might also go into politics, and a special message from a freed hostage for unholy listeners. It's Unholy. I'm Yonit Levy in Tel Aviv.
And I'm Jonathan Friedland in London. Unholy, two Jews on the news. We talked last week about it being a solemn week. This is that week of the national mood swing from Remembrance Day for Fallen Soldiers, Memorial Day, straight into Independence Day. I mean, we've said it a few times in the last 18 months. Moments that are meant to be the occasions for happiness, celebration, party mood. No one really feeling it when you're in the midst of a war and when hostages remain captive, but the kind of whiplash is even more intense, I think it's fair to say this time, partly because of some events that are going on, as it were, sort of extraneous to the war, but have added to a kind of, I mean, I don't want to say biblical drama, but it feels that way looking at some of these pictures. Just tell, I mean, you know, you're in the middle of it. How is it playing out?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's already every year. This is a kind of strange pivot that Israelis have to do in their reality, right? There's Memorial Day where this blanket of sadness descends on the country. Israel's mourning its fallen soldiers and victims of terror. And then in the evening, kind of melting into Independence Day, where you need to be sort of happy. It's a setup that is, you know, has basically accompanied Israel since its beginning. It's enshrined in law since the 60s. It's a very Israeli thing to begin with. I might say it's also a very Jewish thing to sort of bind together the day of sadness and a day of happiness. All this, again, in a normal year, this is the second year after October 7th, so nothing feels normal. We'll get to also this feeling that Israel is really torn from the inside and what happened in Ra'anana on Tuesday. Before that, you mentioned biblical scenes. Really, there are, as we speak now, there are fires, massive wildfires spreading in the area of Jerusalem. You have, you know, hundreds fleeing their vehicles on the main road in this country, which is the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem highway. You know, all this is happening as we speak, and it adds a little bit to the mood that to begin with is slightly, askew in these days. We should say that the main event of this day usually is the torch lighting ceremony. That is the event that takes us from Memorial Day into Independence Day. This year, the government decided because of these wildfires and the high winds that they will not be done live. They will run the tape of the general rehearsal because of the weather conditions, the extreme weather conditions last year. I will remind our listeners that it was also a tape that ran and not the actual event happening live. Then it was because the official reason was because of security issues and warnings. The actual reason, considered by many, was that the government wanted to prevent protests happening during the event itself.
Got to be convenient for this government that's always feared disruption, protest, because there is a huge slice of the population that does not think the government is doing enough to bring hostages home and wants to see this war end. And so a live public ceremony where the public are there is always going to be unpredictable, volatile, and potentially perilous for a government who is at least unpopular on that issue. And so perhaps not wholly dismayed that they have to play a tape instead of run the risk of disruption. I mean, I was going to, everything you've said, I think, will strike a chord and has its own analogue outside Israel. You know, these events that we've been talking about, whether it's Yom HaShoah or Yom HaZikaron on Independence Day, they're often sort of replayed in miniature in diaspora. You know, synagogues might have a Yom Ha'atzmaut event. There may be a vigil event for Memorial Day and so on. I feel as if it's much more muted that there have been periods when the whole Jewish community in a country like this one will gather together for a big public celebration of independence. It doesn't, the Jewish community, it doesn't feel that way this time. But I think a lot of people will be particularly struck by this news that you just referred to there, this attack on a synagogue in Ra'anana. earlier on in this week on Tuesday. And crucially, when people hear that, they'll assume immediately it's a kind of terror attack and it's Israel's external enemies or a Palestinian terror threat. That would be the assumption. Instead, this was an attack by Jews on their fellow Jews, attacking the synagogue to such an extent that the congregants within had to call for the police to protect them. The cause of this was that they were screening a sort of live relay of a ceremony that goes on without much fanfare every year of the Bereaved Parents Forum, Jewish, Israeli and Palestinian parents of those who have been killed. They gather together to grieve their dead in unison. And this it's a very moving and very sort of humane event. As I understand it, this synagogue wasn't hosting the event or anything like it. It was taking place somewhere else. They were just showing a live TV relay so that people grieve on the two sides of this bitter, terrible conflict, grieve their dead at the same time. That was enough to provoke an attack. And I'm mentioning it partly because there will be some of our listeners in the Jewish diaspora who really know about this neighborhood, Renana. It's a place that has quite a large, Anglo population of Jewish immigrants from Britain, United States, South Africa, those kinds of places. But I think just the idea of, at this moment of mourning, that Jews should be fighting other Jews in what, and I've had a message even just, earlier, just minutes before we started recording, from somebody who fits that exact description, an Oler, an immigrant from Britain originally, saying that, describing this attack, in very inflammatory language, perhaps, describing it as a pogrom, Jews attacking other Jews, and saying it's a screaming alarm call. I think the reason why is that, you remember, we even aired the conversation, you and I, during the judicial coup arguments about where people were arguing or raising at least serious articles saying, is Israel capable of a civil war? Could it happen? And it's saying it's a fantastical notion. Of course, it's absurd to even suggest it. But the words were being formed and people were wondering about it. When you see this, Jews attacking other Jews in a synagogue, it's so emotive. The symbolism doesn't even need to be underlined. And therefore, I think that's what my friend talking about an alarm call is referring to.
Yes, I mean, this is really an event that, there are many red lights flaring here for many reasons. First of all, as you say, at the end of the day, it's Jews attacking other Jews at a synagogue on Memorial Day Eve. Just pause on that for a moment. It wasn't even the event itself of Israelis and Palestinians trying to have a Memorial Day together. It was a screening of the event. The event happened simultaneously in Jaffa and Bet Jala on the Palestinian side. And one of the people who talked there was Liat Atzili. She herself was abducted into Gaza. Her husband was murdered. These are people who are carrying the most awful tragedies. And they came to this event. From the beginning, it was clear that there will be some sort of tension there. Right-wing activists were galvanized indeed by the head of the Likud in Ra'anana, in this city, who called them to go to this synagogue. And after this happened, she actually wrote a post on Facebook saying, "To the left in Ra'anana, this is a warning shot." This is the quote of a woman who is the head of the Likud in Ra'anana. Racheli Ben-Ari Scott is her name. And as you said, they were the right-wing activists who came there, attacked the people coming out of the synagogue. They also, according to eyewitnesses, they threw stones. They also spat at the people, physically attacked them. I mean, this is a really, really dangerous situation. And when you think of the fact, and I think this is what is really putting a sort of dark cloud over all of these events today. It's a strange thing, Jonathan, because we're talking in the last hours of Memorial Day, and our listeners will listen to this already when the mood changed into Independence Day. But still, I think it's important to say that this sort of somber mood is due to the fact that Israel can win all of its external enemies. It's stronger than all of them. It really is. But it is that sort of rift inside the society. When you think of, Yair Lapid last week warning that the incitement against the head of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, is so severe that he is afraid that there will be another assassination in Israel. This is where we stand on the year in which we mark 30 years since the Yitzhak Rabin assassination. That is, I think, why the mood is very, very, grave, even as as we are entering Independence Day.
Yeah, I think actually sometimes at these moments of my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a Haredi Jew, Hasidic Jew, who always said, and this was in the 70s and 80s, the great danger, and he was drawing from Jewish texts, he said would always be that internal hatred. That's the thing that frightened him. It's a religiously steeped concept. And just every now and again, I do think of his warning when we come to moments like this.
But I would want to say, as we talk about these dark warnings and heaven forbid, foreshadowings. But I do want to mention another event that happened this week in Jerusalem on Sunday, which was an event organized by the families of the 6 hostages who were murdered in that tunnel in Rafah. It's Hirsch and Carmel and Eden and Ori and Almog and Alex. And it was a night of singing and remembrance and calling for the release of the rest of the hostages. There were Israelis from all walks of life. And importantly, the fans and the players of the 2 soccer teams that are usually sort of rivals, Beitar and Hapoel, who came together for this event, I think for the first time in Israel's history, that united around something. So I think it's also important to remember, as we talk about these sort of dark days or these concerns, rather, I think it's also important to remember this is also Israel. It's complicated, but it's, there are these rays of light.
For sure. And those people who are working for somehow for either whether it's internal unity or, like we mentioned before, the bereaved parents, for some kind of reaching across the divide, those people really need, all the support they can get, especially, I would say, from Jews around the world, because these can feel, like tough times, and those efforts deserve recognition. We are approaching, and this will be in people's minds, day 600 of this war, a war that when it began, I think, I remember our conversation where it was October and you warned me that it might go on as long as till the following January, and that seemed too long to me. And here we are, it's 600 days. I think people thought it would be weeks or months. The ceasefire ended in March. It's sort of off the agenda, you feel, of the United States, who were so involved in brokering that ceasefire when it came in the end of January, as the Biden administration transitioned into the Trump administration. Trump was sending his envoy, Steve Witkoff, as if this was something they wanted to get wrapped up now, imminently. It's fallen away as a priority for them. Witkoff is busy with Russia and Ukraine. What's your sense of the sort of trajectory? Because given that this is a moment where you can sort of reflect and pause as we reach that milestone of 600, as well as, of course, Independence Day, Memorial Day.
I would say one thing. First of all, that we shouldn't be confused by the fact that perhaps Israel is sort of pushing forward into a more intensive war in Gaza. That could be a sort of interim period in which what might be happening, and again, this is a little bit of an assumption and a little of what I know here. I think what might be happening is an attempt to reach some sort of deal that is, we've been talking about this a lot on the table, 10 hostages and 40 days of a ceasefire. We have to remember that in the background stands Donald Trump, who wants to go to Saudi Arabia, and what his plans are very clear. So I do think that Netanyahu is trying to plan on this sort of intensifying the war for a very short period, getting some of the hostages out so as to justify a sort of ceasefire. In the meantime, we have to mention something that made a lot of headlines inside Israel yesterday. Netanyahu meeting with the people who will light the torches in the torch lighting ceremony and saying there are 24 hostages alive. Sarah Netanyahu sitting next to him, uttering one word: less. And that created an immense amount of outrage in Israel for several reasons. First of all, the insensitivity of it, right? I mean, why are you saying to hostage families who are waiting to hear anything about their loved ones, that kind of thing? And also, this is based on intelligence information. Is the prime minister's wife privy to that kind of information, that she knows that it's less than 24 hostages alive? All of that, of course, made, as I said, a lot of headlines. Something else making headlines is...
Just before you move on to the other thing, I mean, just the insensitivity of that is so important to stress. Your families who've been waiting 18 months for any word of their child or loved one, to hear what could be important factual information that way, as an aside, correcting her husband, almost as if sort of marital bickering, rather than if you know something, then sit these people down and say, I'm very, very sorry, we have very grave news for you, and do it in a way that people can cope. To do it that way, so now every one of those 24 families are thinking, what does she know? And is my loved one of the ones who's dead, making that figure less than 24? It's unbelievable, the crassness of it. I mean, I know we have our sort of chutzpah. Well, this is beyond that. This is just a sort of inhuman response, I think. And I'm not at all surprised it's gone round and been shocking, even to people who are sort of long past the point of being shocked.
Yeah, and indeed, the hostage family said, if you know anything, please tell us. I mean, this is not the way, as you say, this is not the way we are supposed to discover that our loved one is no longer alive. Another thing that made some headlines is Ronen Bar, who's Netanyahu's closest advisor. For all thoughts and purposes, he is the actual minister for foreign affairs here in Israel. But he said in a conference in Jerusalem that the war could last up to another 12 months and Israel will emerge victorious. Just a side note on that, we talked a lot about how Netanyahu only speaks in English and only speaks to Channel 14, which is considered his mouthpiece here in this country. Ronen Bar, another example, like his mentor Netanyahu, speaks only in English, which is quite incredible. He's also the head of the negotiation team now that Ronen Bar was moved aside, negotiations for the hostage release, and the Israeli people have to rely on translation from English to Hebrew to know what his views are and what he is saying.
Yeah, which is another kind of insult. Just on the point about the negotiations, and, I'm not privy to the inside track there, but what is reported is that there is some offer from Hamas, channeled through its, patrons, that says, let's do this longer term ceasefire of 5 years in duration. There's suggestions that this would appeal to the Americans who prefer, the kind of go big or go home approach of the Trump administration. If that is genuinely on the table, that is an amazing thing for a government not to engage with and just to talk about more war for this reason. If that were the case, then it would enable the 24, as we hope, living hostages to come back. And of course, if there was any threat, any resumption of any kind of menace from Hamas, the reality is, of course, Israel would go in. They would just simply say, Hamas have broken the ceasefire, we're going back in again. This idea that you've got to keep fighting for this illusory goal of a total defeat, where Hamas come out waving a white flag and its leaders are all kicked out. It is an illusion, but it's not a cost-free illusion, because every day you persist with that fight, you kill lots and lots of Palestinian civilians, and you keep those hostages there in captivity. I just don't understand how there isn't more, engagement with this idea of a 5-year pause. I know all the reasons to be cynical and skeptical. You can't believe a single thing or trust a word comes out of Hamas's mouth. I agree. But if it means you can get the hostages back and then go in whenever you need to, which is a lot of what the military was saying earlier on in July of last year when there was something similar in the air, I don't know why decision makers don't grab that with both hands.
Well, I think the thinking on that is, of course, that Hamas sadly are not foolish. And if they want a 5-year cessation of violence, they will get all the international assurances they can to make that happen. And I think that is the concern, not only political concern made by the prime minister, but also in the defense echelon. So much of this is seen, and we heard Oren Seter, who actually sat in the rooms and was number 2 in the negotiating team for Israel, saying, this is a bad faith actor. We can't trust anything they say. Everything seems like a trick. So I can understand why there's hesitation around this, but there's one thing that is irreversible, and that is the lives of the hostages. We hope there are indeed 24 that are alive, and not, as the prime minister's wife said, less. Their time is beyond running out. That is a main consideration that is made by many Israelis.
Yeah. I mean, obviously all lives lost are irreversibly lost. But my point would also be just, of course they're bad faith actors. That's right. So you take what they can give you, and then you trust nothing. And you reserve the right to go back in. And one of the big advantages of having the Trump administration there, if you're Netanyahu, is he'll have your back if you do go back in. He's not going to give you a hard time about that. So I think, to me, it seems like an opening, but very little engagement. Let's just close on one thing which we've been covering for weeks and weeks and weeks, which is the Ronen Bar story, the man who's the head of domestic intelligence, the Shin Bet in Israel. There was this huge standoff. We've been talking about it. In a way, it reached a sort of I mean, I don't want to say resolution, but there was a kind of denouement.
Yes, exactly. I mean, Ronen Bar, we talked about it last week, submitted his affidavit to the Supreme Court. Netanyahu wanted to fire him. He said really a few damning things against the prime minister. Maybe the most damning line was that the prime minister led him to understand that if there will ever be a constitutional crisis, he will have to be, the head of the Shin Bet will have to be loyal to Netanyahu and not to the judiciary. Netanyahu answering with his own affidavit that he signed with a few of the protocols, the sort of documents from different conversations that are supposed to be classified. In this country, the prime minister is the only one who can release these classified documents. So, of course, they fit with his agenda of saying that everything Ronen Bar said was a lie. By the way, to this exact line, this exact accusation, he just said essentially something like, there is no proof that I actually said that, which is interesting. The other things he sort of said were downright lies made by Ronen Bar. This led to this kind of he said situation or standoff, led to Ronen Bar's decision to say that he will step down in the middle of June, 15th of June, in fact, and then it will be the situation in which Netanyahu will have to appoint his successor. We should point out that even that decision made by Netanyahu will have to be under the jurisdiction of the High Court of Justice. So if he decides to say that his our star of Channel 14 will be the next head of Shin Bet, High Court of Justice will decide that that is not possible because of the reasonableness clause. So this is still an open story, but Ronen Bar's own story is very close to the end of it as the head of the domestic security service in Israel.
Yeah, I'm worried now about that Channel 14 prediction because of the
Not
Trump,
giving anyone any ideas.
No, I think you may have done there because, of course, Netanyahu's sort of twin in the White House picks his senior posts from the ranks of the loyal TV network, and you could imagine you would not put it past Netanyahu doing the same thing. Before we go to our very special guest interview this week, I just thought we would want to mention elections. There were big elections, of course, this week in Canada. Those were very interesting. The Trump effect. Did you see that amazing thing, by the way, this interview with Donald Trump bragging that he had made the massive difference in the Canadian election? I was so disliked, he said, that the guy lost 25 points. It was like, as long as I'm the guy making the weather, I don't mind if it's in my favor or not. It just means everyone's talking about me. It was sort of an amazing thing. We will talk about Canada in an episode to come. But the election I want to talk about this week is to the World Zionist Congress, which sounds a little bit archaic. It's a body that predates the state of Israel itself. But the crucial thing about it is voters are not confined to Israel. The electorate is the Jewish world, including Israelis, but including the Jewish diaspora. It's a body that has still a large budget measured in the billions of dollars that is spent on projects inside Israel, but also in Jewish communities around the world. And the body doesn't have elections all that often, but it's got them again now. It's billed as the sort of parliament of the Jewish people. Registration is going on now. It's only a few days left, really, to go to register. And I think in the UK, you have to spend £1. It's probably $1 in the US to register your vote. And then you get to vote. And there's all these competing different slates. And what they explain is, there are slates of candidates associated with the right who want the money to go towards, for example, construction of settlements. Then there's groups on the left who want it to go to progressive, liberal Jewish movements and denominations, reform and otherwise, and that also want to, make the case for equality and so on. So this whole argument is being slugged out. Those elections will be important because they, in a way, set a direction for where this big sort of resource built up over many, many decades and donations and so on is allocated, and it will tell you something about the direction of travel of the Jewish people as opposed to either Jewish diaspora communities or Israel. This time, it's both.
Yeah, we should say that the Congress is made out of a third diaspora Jews in America, third diaspora Jews in the rest of the world, and third Israel. So the makeup of the Israeli part of this is mirrors the makeup of the Knesset, which means that if you are in any way, leaning left, you would be worried that what happens here is that it turned more to the right because the Israeli Knesset moved more to the right. The main sort of focus these days is on the American part of the delegation. There are, if I'm not mistaken, 152 out of the 532 that are elected. So that's really important. Any American citizen or resident can register. And as you said, it's about money allocated. There's a lot of money inside this umbrella organization, right? It's the Jewish, agency, and it's Vitzo and it's Hadassah, and it's also the Jewish National Fund, Kakal, of course. So if you are, for example, a diaspora Jew, and I'm not looking at you specifically, Jonathan, but you don't like where the policies are going, this is a chance to actually, have a stake in where this is going. This year, there are 22 slates, which is the highest number ever running. It's interesting. There's an ultra-Orthodox party. The elections, by the way, are every 5 years. Ultra-Orthodox party ran for the first time last time. It's interesting that the ultra-Orthodox party would say it's part of the Zionist movement. In any case, there's also an organization another slate called AID, which is really interesting because they're targeting specifically Israelis living in the U.S. who can vote for this. And they're sort of pro-democracy, anti-judicial overhaul. All of that is really interesting. It's all part of these elections.
Yeah, I mean, your point about the ultra-Orthodox is because, of course, historically, they have been ambivalent, if not hostile, to Zionism, but they're happy to take their seats in the World Zionist Congress because if that's where the potential budget allocations are coming from for their religious academies and so on, they will be there. A lot of these slates around the world mirror the political parties in Israel. So there is one that's called Jewish Labour / Meretz, mirroring and their slogan is for a democratic Israel. There's also one that's formed, Hatzeinu Merakaz, out of the Reform, Liberal, Masorti movements. There's all kinds of options there. I think probably the simplest wherever you are in the world, sort of Google World Zionist Congress, register to vote, and something will come up that's relevant for where you are.
Yeah.
And if
and
you
as we said, there are only a few days.
Minute or two, only a few days left to do that. So, put that on your to-do list if you care about the direction of travel. For Israel and the wider Jewish world. Should we perhaps make room now for our special guest on this Independence Day episode of our program, someone who has been garlanded by his nation with its highest civil honor, a huge leader in so many sectors that really are making Israel's future, and we are delighted to have him.
Eyal Waldman is an Israeli businessman, entrepreneur, philanthropist, a recipient of the prestigious Israel Prize, an event we will return to later. He's an integral part of the AI revolution. He co-founded Mellanox Technologies, which was sold to Nvidia. He lost his daughter, Danielle, who was murdered on October 7th. And he is the Israeli we wanted to talk to as Israel is entering its 78th year and asking what next. Eyal, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
You usually say you're an optimist. We are talking exactly in those hours in which Yom HaZikaron melts into Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. Can I ask you how this day finds you? What is your mood?
It's a difficult day. It's a very difficult day, especially we came back from Danielle's and Noam grave, and it's not something that, happens often when we have a group of people, friends of Noam, of Danielle, of my other kids, and Noam's family come to be together to memorize Danielle and Noam. So it's emotional and it's draining. So that's where we are.
And that obviously goes to the frame of mind you yourself personally in, but how do you think the country is at this Independence Day?
I think the country is in somewhat trauma, and you see it in the streets, you see it in conversations. We still have 59 hostages in Gaza, which is very traumatic to, I think, everybody in Israel. And we need to get those 59 hostages back. There's still events for Independence Day, but I think the mood is not as it's usually used to be before October 7, 23. And I think less people are celebrating. Obviously, there's still fighting in Gaza. and other fronts in Lebanon, sometimes in Syria and the West Bank. So you see a lot of reserves and a lot of soldiers being engaged in combat positions. We feel what's going on. At the same time, there are Independence Day events. The country is very resilient, is very robust. People want to celebrate. People will celebrate. There are most of the ceremonies in Israel as they used to be every year. I think in some of them, the prime minister will not participate for some reasons, but people want to memorize and to celebrate Independence Day, 77 years for Israel.
We will go into talking about, I think, a little bit more in depth about Israeli society and what it's going through, and also the challenges it has with its neighbors in the shadow of October 7th. But I would want to specifically ask you, because this is the world you come from, Israel's high-tech sector. There has been new data coming out from Israel's Innovation Authority talking about the fact that every month since the war began, 800 employees of the high-tech sector have left Israel. That is accumulating to be a pretty big number. There are also people who left before that because of the judicial overhaul. How worried are you that Israel might be losing its edge in that regard?
I think the high tech sector and the defense sector in Israel is pretty robust, pretty resilient. Yeah, I think some people are leaving. I think the majority is staying on board to continue and develop in Israel, both in Israeli companies and international companies. I hope some of the people that are leaving today will come back in the coming years or when we change the leadership here in Israel. But we have a very resilient, very robust high tech and defense sectors here in Israel.
What does it say, do you think, about the country that normally when there's a brain drain, everyone worries about that? But in this case, there will be people, some Israelis, who look at these liberal, secular, Tel Aviv type high tech people leaving and think, good, I'm glad to see the back of them because that means their voting power, their political power reduces. And that group might even include the prime minister himself. First of all, do you think I'm right about that? But also, what does it say about Israel if that is the case?
I hope people understand that we need the good employees or the good people to stay in Israel and continue and contribute to its economy, to its defense, and so on. Obviously, there are people that think it may be a good thing for Israel or for the demography, but I don't think there's many of them. I think we want to have people stay here. We want to have people continue and work in Israel, continue to build companies, and help the ecosystem, both on the economy side and obviously the military side.
We say this always about you. Mellanox Technologies was sold to Nvidia for $6.9 billion in 2019. If we want to be accurate, we should say that Mellanox is really at the core of Nvidia's rise in AI. Could you explain why? I mean, I can say you built the infrastructure for everything to run faster. That's as far as I can go. Can you help us explain why that is so important?
Yeah, what Mellanox did and what Mellanox is doing now as part of NVIDIA is we connect the brains and the storage and where the data is together. NVIDIA does the brain. It does the graphic processor unit that manipulates and processes data and does whatever you want to do to the data. But in order for the GPU, for the brain to be efficient, you need to bring data very, very fast in and out of the computer. And that's exactly what Mellanox is doing now. When you bring more data faster, your computer becomes more intelligent, becomes smarter. So what Mellanox enables NVIDIA or actually anybody else is to process more data at the same period of time. So you can analyze more data, you can process, you can manipulate, and you can make smarter decisions. You can become more intelligent. We've done this before with supercomputers. We were in the highest percentage of supercomputers in the world. We did it for the hyperscale infrastructure, and we did it for artificial intelligence infrastructure around the world. Now, together with NVIDIA, the symbiotic relationship between NVIDIA's technologies and Mellanox technologies is amazing. And that's what brought, 97 billion plus 7 billion to be worth more than $3 trillion.
So you sold your company short,
which
is what you're saying, Eyal. So 6.9 billion.
We definitely sold the company short, but I think the symbiotic relations and all of the employees and the shareholders enjoy because I think they invested also in NVIDIA and we had a lot of equity. have made significant the number one semiconductor company and number two overall market, which is we're very proud of.
So there'll be plenty of people who, when they hear this about their computers getting more and more intelligent because everything's faster and faster and faster, they'll be cheering. And then there'll be some people who will be concerned and worried because they fear that the AI is something to be worried about. They think of, all the different concerns. So I'm sure you're not in the sort of AI pessimism camp. It wouldn't be weird if you were, given what you do. But is there any part of this technology that does worry you a little bit, maybe in the hands of people who aren't like you?
So first, you need to have regulations to control the power of artificial intelligence. I'll give you a simple example. You trust ChatGPT or you trust any other AI bot that you're using. And if you ask him for a recipe, how to make a cake or how to make whatever you want, and that recipe tells you put cyanide into the mix, probably you will follow that and put cyanide because you don't understand and so on. So if this power of providing this chat GPT or something this comes to the wrong hands or uses the wrong data, it can cause damage. But as long as we regulate and we make sure that there's valid data that those applications are using and it's in the right hands and we regulate it, it's in good hands and it's okay. People sometimes have this vision from a lot of science fiction movies and books that computers can control the world and make things happen. But that's not the case. We always are, the engineers control both the hardware and the software. And it's going to be something that's very hard to make happen. So we feel very comfortable. We continue to develop artificial intelligence. I think it's helpful in all fronts, in medical applications, in pharmaceutical and fintech, financial technology, agriculture, everything. It's very, very significant, and our lives are getting more secure, getting better in all aspects because of artificial intelligence. So we're very much for using artificial intelligence in everything.
By the way,
can.
I wonder when you hear Google's DeepMind CEO saying on 60 Minutes that in a decade all disease will be cured by AI. Do you think that's true?
I think that AI will help us find cure for cancer, so that we will be able to build a targeted pill per person, per cancer, that most cancer diseases will be curable. So imagine that AI enables us to make cancer a curable disease. I think it's amazing. Assume that AI built right makes the world so much secure that you cannot anymore steal money or have black markets and so on. So those things are things that are in front of us. I think the world is becoming better. I don't think you can imagine the world without you being able to search on Google today, or without using a bot that you can ask questions. And we're just making it better and better and better, and in all aspects of life. So our lives become better. I think Google for you or ChatGPT for you makes your life better, easier, smarter. And just when you go to Web3 and when you go to the metaverse, it's going to be even more interactive. So you'll have bots surrounding you and whatever animals or creatures you want or you like with you all the time, and you can converse with them, and you can make conversations. You can play with chess with your grandfather that's long time gone. A lot of those things will enable us to have a much richer, safer, intelligent, longer, more healthier lives in the future.
So I'll put you through my very parochial sort of Jewish worry, which is about information and AI's ability to create what could look like, false evidence, videos that look real but aren't real. And I think the reason why I say that's a Jewish worry is that when you can create falsehoods, false pictures, documents that look as if they're 100 years old but aren't, but are invented, very often the target of those falsehoods have been, historically, I'm talking about over hundreds of years, have been directed at Jews. And I just sort of wonder about, AI and a world of disinformation and false information. It's worrying anyway, by the way, even if you take out the Jewish angle. It's just a sort of worry.
So it's the same thing that you had in propaganda, let's say in Eastern Europe,
right?
In the papers or in the radio. You can say whatever you want or write whatever you want. So you could have false information in the newspaper that everybody's reading. So There was fake news a long time ago that was written or spoken in media that you used at that time. It wasn't in social media, but it was in the radio, it was in the papers. So fake news was always there, and governments could always control. Now it's more intelligent, and by the way, you have better tools to fight fake news with AI. So don't misunderstand. It's not something new. It's something we've always lived with. We need to continue managing it. There's always the bad and the good that are using the technology, and I hope we'll stay where we are, where the good people are making better use of that.
You are talking a lot about artificial intelligence. Let's talk about the dangers of human intelligence, or rather the limitations of human intelligence, and what we saw, the litany of failures leading up to October 7th. Can you explain, to yourself what happened to Israel, the startup nation, this military might? What happened on that day?
Yeah, we screwed up big time. Our intelligence forces got a lot of information, but when the information is coming from the field and shows you one picture, but then information coming from heads of states like Qatar or other places, and you want to believe what they're saying, you kind of fall asleep. And when Hamas has been able to put us asleep by doing drills, and when Gadi Eisenkut was chief of staff, anyone that got close to the fence was shot in the knees. And at one point, I wanted to actually buy protests, advanced protests for the Palestinians to make sure that we it's okay, we should, because we don't want you close to the fence, but we want to take care of you because we think it's humanitarian. At some point, we let them get closer to the fence. We stopped shooting them at the knees. Another point, we let more people get to the fence, and they normalized them getting closer to the fence, and then they did drills and they did exercises, and we just did not prevent that from happening. They were prevented to come close. They came closer. They went first children and women, then men, then trucks were close to the fence, and they did drills, and they did used bombs and explosives and so on. And we felt like this is part of the normal situation, and we felt we're in a good situation. On top of that, our prime minister said it's better to work with Hamas than with the Palestinian Authority. And we should support Hamas because they want to keep the status quo. They want to keep things quiet. They don't want us to go back into Gaza. And we felt like us supporting Hamas than the Palestinian Authority is much better for Israel, which is obviously completely wrong. And then there's tens, if hundreds of millions, if not much more, pouring dollars into Gaza. And instead of the Palestinians taking this money and building the next Hong Kong or Singapore and using it for the citizens and developing hotels and agriculture and industry and tourism and so on, what they did is they dug tunnels, they trained people, and they bought missiles and built missiles and so on. Rockets, not missiles. So if you take all this to account, we've made a huge mistake, a huge intelligence mistake. Our intelligence forces made a huge screw up that should never have happened. We felt very comfortable with where we are. And there's a book by Andy Grove says, only the paranoid survives. We were completely not paranoid. We felt too comfortable. And the head of intelligence, Khalifa, was very arrogant, felt very good. Shabak didn't have enough human-eyed information inside Gaza. And if you remember, there was an incident a few years before where our top units, Sayeret Matkal, lost a number of guys inside Gaza and the operation failed, which prevented us from tapping into some of the communication lines within Gaza. So we were kind of in the dark and we were surprised. Now, specifically on October 7th was Simchat Torah. The army did tactical mistakes by sending troops into the West Bank to protect Sukkot and left the Gaza front really not protected because we felt very comfortable with Gaza. Gaza was a boring frontier where the West Bank considered to be hot with what happened in Chavara and all those things. So when they broke the fence, when they took out our systems that see and shoot, we didn't have enough forces there. It was very easy for them to penetrate. It took us 3 days 3 days to take all of the terrorists out of there. I went down there on Sunday night. The attack was on Saturday. I was abroad. I didn't go. I would have gone down Saturday, but I was not here. I went down Sunday night, Monday early morning, and there were still engagements between terrorists and some of our units to look for Danielle and Noam. But you could see there's a lot of fights, it's a lot of confusion. What happened there, which is something that never happened to us, they've conquered the division headquarters. And the South Command did not even report that. I met with the Air Force commander. He told me until 4:30 p.m., I didn't have a picture of what's going on. I met the two pilots that took off first in 6:45. They took off from Hatzerim in two F-16s. The Air Force told them to go and protect the gas platforms in the sea. They didn't tell them nothing. They patrolled. They could not land back in Hatzerim because of rockets, so they had to land in Ramon. And he said, the pilot told me, the first time I understood there's invasion to Israel when the mechanic opened my my cockpit and told me what's going on. I was really misinformed. And then you've seen many units rush down there and do whatever they could have done. There's been kibbutz near Oz that the soldiers got into the kibbutz only after all of the terrorists already left. Our citizens were in shelters until 11 p.m. that day, from let's say 6:30 a.m. until 11 p.m., with soldiers only getting in to rescue them around that time. A huge mess, miscommunications, a lot of heroes that saved a lot of people and done right things, but then at the same time, a lot of units that ran away from terrorists. People don't say that didn't fight in the right manner that they should have. So it started with intelligence and then started with the amount of forces we had down there and then the behavior of some of the units that we had down there.
So you're describing there a series of military and intelligence failures, and we screwed up big time, is how you put it.
It started with the prime minister, I said.
Well,
because the prime minister said it's better for us to continue pouring money into Hamas that came from Qatar and fund them and keep things quiet, as opposed to work with the PA on building some relationship. And I'll talk about this in the future of what we need to do with the Palestinians, with Syria, with Lebanon, with Saudi, if you have time. It's a government directive that said we want to keep good relationship with Hamas on the expense of the Palestinian Authority.
So just on the politics of that, the government that did that is still in place. It actually is not trailing massively in opinion polls. I think the last one gives it a very healthy 24 seats. The prime minister is still the prime minister. People, I have to say, from abroad are astonished by that because they think of this epic failure, including the political failure you've identified, and don't understand it. So how do you, in your own mind, explain this, that somebody who made the big strategic decision you've just described is still in the job and apparently not, so discredited that he's on two or three seats in the polls, but 24?
It's a big question, and it's something that I'm fighting for a number of years now. I think Benjamin Netanyahu should not be the prime minister. I think he should have resigned right after. He should have taken responsibility and resigned and went to elections. But I think for Benjamin Netanyahu, the most important thing for him is to stay in power and stay the prime minister. He's here in court on at least 3, if not 4 or 5 criminal charges. And what he's worried about, that if he does not stay prime minister, he will go to jail. So he's trying to save his skin. And this is the most important thing for our prime minister, unfortunately. And he's a smart guy, so he can manipulate a lot of things and parties and bring Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the Orthodox, most religious people, and give them a lot of funding and money and bribes and so on to keep them his government in place. I hope that once we go into elections, which unfortunately will be only in 26 because he has 68 parliament members out of 120, if not 69, I hope that in those elections we'll have a new government come out of that.
This begs the question if you think of going into politics. So I'm interested in that, but also to ask you how you see. I mean, it's really known that in the Mellanox employed Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. You still employ them in the West Bank. How do you see this conflict resolving? I mean, it seems further than it was, before October 7th.
So I think there's only one solution for the Palestinian issue, and this is two states for two people. And eventually, our historical path will lead to a two-state solution. The only difference with who's in the lead of both people, the Palestinian people should change their leadership, and the Israeli people should change their leadership. The only thing that those leaders will determine is how long it's going to take and how many people are going to die during this process. But eventually, we're going to end up with two states for two people. We don't want, there's two alternatives. One, we can continue killing each other, which we're pretty good at. And the other is to live alongside each other, which we haven't tried. And if you look at the past 50 years, more than 70 very violent conflicts have been resolved. Conflicts where they killed, burned, raped, did awful things to each other. They came to peace. If you look at Northern Ireland, if you look at Falkland, if you look in Africa, you look at Yugoslavia and many other places, they have been able. We need to learn how they've done this and do it here. It is not comprehensible that we cannot get to a solution here between two people to live together in this geopolitical situation. So I hope that the government will change. I hope that Abu Mazen will change. And obviously Hamas controlling Gaza will change. That's something we're going to take care of. And eventually we will be able to get two-state solution. If you look at 1973, which was the worst crisis for Israel until October 23, no one thought we could do peace with Egypt. Egypt was our number one enemy. Egypt was our number one enemy. One person, one guy that the Egyptians did not support. No one from Egypt supported. The Israelis did not trust and did not believe. But one guy said, I want to come and talk to your parliament, to the Knesset. And this was Sadat. And Begin was smart enough to invite him to come and talk to the Knesset. So one guy or one and a half guys did peace between the two worst enemies in 1973. And it was only 4 years after the crisis. So in 1977, Sadat came to Israel, to the Knesset, to speak to the Knesset. Or I think it was 1979 when he came, but 1977, those negotiations started. So one guy, two guys can make the whole difference. So we need two leaders that are brave enough and smart enough to understand what's best for the people, and the whole thing can change on a dime. I think it's very important to talk about what's happening in the north. I think it's once in 100 times that we have the opportunity to make a difference with Syria and with Lebanon. And I've been talking to Syrian people and to Lebanese, but more Syria. I think it's more important. And I feel that we may lose even this opportunity. So we need to listen to what's happening there. We need to be proactive and engage with Syria. If you ask me, I think we have opportunity now on three things. One is Syria, Lebanon in the north, and in Lebanon we're working more, but I think we should also work in Syria. And obviously Saudi Arabia, which I think Trump is working a lot for us. So I believe we're in front of a series of significant possibilities to change the geopolitical situation in our area. We've done this with Egypt. We've done this with Jordan. The Abraham Accord is done with Bahrain, the Emiratis, Morocco. And now we have a chance. And I think Julian, the Syrian leader, said he wants to join the Abraham Accord. We should listen carefully to this. We should use this. I don't want to talk about some things that we're doing but we should definitely take this opportunity now. In addition to what Trump is working with Saudi, work on the north side and have Syria, Lebanon, obviously Saudi. And after that, I think there's be a domino effect of a lot of other Muslim and Arab countries to join this. And this whole ecosystem will look much different. So it's an opportunity. Every crisis can be used to change as a great opportunity in front of us. And that's what I would do if I had to make the decisions.
When you talk about new leadership, people do wonder about you as being somebody who might step into the arena rather than just hoping for new leadership, maybe doing something. I'm not saying to be the leader himself, but to get into politics. What do you say?
First, I think we don't have the right leadership today on the opposition, if at all. And we need to change this. I don't think we have the right leader. And I'm trying to change the political landscape in Israel in multiple ways. People ask me whether I will go and run. I'm not sure yet. I'd rather stay on the private side or on the business side. I definitely will be involved and try to make a difference. And I hope we'll find the right person who's better than me to come and lead and make this the right decisions for the people and make a big difference.
Can I end with what we started with, Eyal? I talked to Rachel Goldberg, and a few months ago, she said that she feels like she put all of her many emotions in many bags, and she's not yet opened them. I wonder if you've opened your bags.
I try not to.
Yeah. Do you think that's a better way to go, or it's the temporary way?
I don't know if it's better, but that's my way of, I'm sure Danielle would wanted us to continue living and be happy and continue as we are. So that's what I'm trying to do. Telling my kids, my ex-wife, and everybody that we should continue with our lives. They're here with us, and we should just continue living.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for this conversation and to send our condolences belatedly. And thank you very much for everything that we talked about today.
Thank you very much.
Well, that is a very different voice. And, you just think about it, he didn't rule out an entry into politics at all. Quite the opposite. He said he's thinking about it. He'd rather others do it. But what a huge deal that would be. Somebody of that level of resources. He's obviously a billionaire after the sale of his company. And, look, it was music to my ears. There are very few people who still are upfront about the case for a two-state solution. It's very fashionable to say that is dead and buried. And he's somebody who's got the resources to make sure that people listen to that anew. And so I found that in some ways quite encouraging.
He is very much involved in trying to make this country a better place in the way that he sees it. He is very much thinking about Gaza the day after, what it should look like. And this is a man who also has the resources to talk about that. So I think it's also a point we should remind our listeners. He was awarded the Israel Prize last year. And when the committee came up with his name in the category of entrepreneurship, really, you can't think of anyone better. A contrarian to this, the Minister of Education tried to shift the prizes in a way that he wouldn't receive the prize. Eventually, there was a public outcry, and he did. But it just shows you, first of all, how important he is in this country and how his voice is prominent. And this is a man who really is trying to change things here. And I think he's a name to notice. When he says he probably won't go into politics, let's say, that it would be something that I would follow closely.
No, we will definitely do that. Also, his point about Syria. That he took that seriously. Syria has said, what noises have come out of Damascus at least, saying we might be up for a normalization agreement with Israel. That is a huge deal. Again, heartening that he takes that seriously. He's not dismissing that. I think you do have leadership in Israel at the moment that is just constantly slamming the door on these openings. And he's there saying we shouldn't be doing that. There's a chance. Also, that point, quite poignant in a way, 70 conflicts have been resolved or managed or settled in this period, of Israel's long existence, or not that long existence, but Israel suddenly, so many Israelis, so many Palestinians believe there's something specially insoluble about their conflict. Yeah. And he is a very practical man who's in the world, who's made great success of his efforts, who says there's no reason why this should be an exception. Who knows? Maybe it's possible.
Yes, and finally, this is a man who paid the highest price. On October 7th, his daughter was murdered. And the way, first of all, you feel that pain, it's palpable. But also trying to, continue with his life and what he is doing. I think that is also something that we should note. So we're very glad that he came on.
Yeah, and incredibly, actually, still talking the language of peace, even after he, as you say, has paid the ultimate price in the loss of his daughter. And we heard how he is still wrestling with that. You could hear that in his voice very, very clearly. So good to have spoken with Eyal Waldman. I think it's time for our awards. I'm going to take the chutzpah one. I'm aware, by the way, as I do this, that I'm returning to a well that I may have visited before, which is some of our friends on the right of the Republican Party in the United States, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, she who gave us Jewish space lasers, for which I think we did decorate her with.
She revealed the space lasers. She didn't give them to us. We gave them to ourselves. She just revealed. She told the world.
and she told the world about how we control the weather with space lasers, one of our previously unsung achievements. Senate Republicans have added an amendment to legislation that was drafted in order to address the rise in anti-Semitism, particularly on US college campuses. So a couple of Senate Republicans have added some language in order to enable those who want to preach that Jews killed Jesus. In other words, they were worried that this legislation against anti-Semitism might hurt some Christians who want to add that, okay, we feel bad about the Jews suffering anti-Semitism, but let's not forget they killed Jesus, which is, of course, a discredited claim that is, millennia old in terms of the role it has played in fostering, nurturing anti-Semitism across Christendom. Of course, fact check, it was an order of the occupying Romans that executed and crucified Jesus. It wasn't the Jews who did it. But nevertheless, many of those Republicans, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, former Congressman Matt Gaetz, thought it was a problem that this bill would say that accusing Jews of deicide is anti-Semitic. They want a sort of carve-out in the legislation that enables them to keep going with that. That is, I think, going through on Capitol Hill as you and I speak. So I think a little chutzpah award for making sure that you still keep the right to come up with what in some ways is the mother and father of all anti-Semitic claims, even as you say we're acting against anti-Semitism.
Yes, I think the word chutzpah does attach itself elegantly to this story. For Mensch, we have a special treat, I think, for unholy listeners. This is a special message from a woman that will always, I think, be deserving of the title Mensch. This is Emily Damari. She was held by Hamas 471 days, abducted from her house in Kfar Aza, together with her very good friend, Gali Berman, who actually went there to try and help her. They were abducted together. He is still held by Hamas, together with his brother, Zivi, and she is, doing everything she can to raise awareness for them and for the hostages. We should say that she's also been called to light one of the torches in the torch lighting ceremony for Independence Day, and this is what she wanted to send to unholy listeners.
Hi, Yonit, hi, Jonathan, and hello to the unholy listeners. My name is Emily Damari, and today is such an emotional day for me. Last Yom Ha'atzmaut, I was in Gaza. Today I'm with my family, friends, and the people of Israel. It has been a very hard year for everyone in Israel and for all Jewish people around the world. We need to thank God that we have our own country, we are free, and we have the best army in the world that will fight for us and for our freedom and defend us. I also want to give a special thanks to all the Jews in the world, but especially to the UK Jewish community, who came out to support my mother and my family, campaigning tirelessly to help secure my release. But the remaining 59 hostages in Gaza do not have their freedom. We need to pray for them and for their families who have been waiting for them for over 18 months. Gali and Ziv Berman from Kibbutz Kfar Aza and all the others, 57 of our brothers. They all need to come home now. Today, God bless Israel and Am Israel Chai.
Very good to hear the voice of Emily Damari. Still sort of amazing to hear her voice, because somebody we were talking about, a face on a poster for so long, well over a year, as you said, and now we hear her in her own voice. It's wonderful that she spoke directly to you and me and directly to our listeners.
And specifically to the Jewish community in the UK, thanking them for everything that they did to help her mother and to help for her release.
And you'll remember that it was the case of that community help for her that prompted me to break my Arsenal allegiance and make Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, Emily's favourite football team, our Mensch of the week, because they had taken a stand and done a lot to raise awareness of her case. So a very worthy Mensch of the week in Emily Damari. Thank you, Emily, for that message.
We are winding up our show, and we will say our thank you to Michal Porat, and we will meet next week, Jonathan.
See you then.